Здравствуйте, товарищи. And I want to open our discussion on something I've been thinking about, and I think would be an interesting thing to talk about. And that is, was the atom bomb at the end of World War II necessary? And I've got a bunch of different opinions on this, but overall, I do think it was necessary, but not for the reason that everyone else seems to think. And the reason that everyone else seems to think is it was necessary to make the Japanese surrender at the end of World War II, which was not true. In fact, I think it's a very common misconception that the Japanese were, super like fanatical. Like, they were fanatical. I'll agree, they were really fanatical, but I mean, they had nothing left. And they're still human beings, and they still have brains, and they can still see that they have nothing left. I mean, at the end of May, the Japanese only had enough material to continue the war for 3 more months. They were being firebombed into oblivion by American bombers, which actually killed more people than the atom bomb. And, they had nothing. There was nothing left to fight against with. I mean, the Americans, I don't think, would have invaded anyway. They probably just could have, continued to firebomb them or something, and the Japanese would have capitulated. Or they just could have starved them out, and the Japanese would have capitulated. Like, the Japanese didn't have any methods with to attack anymore. So what they did is actually sent a message to Russia. Sent a message to Stalin, saying, hey, we surrender. Can you pass this message on to the Americans? And for whatever reason, Stalin maybe didn't get the message. Maybe he looked at the message and was like, and tossed it aside. Well, for whatever reason, Stalin didn't get the message. And the Japanese wanted to send a message to Russia and surrender to, send the message to Russia and then have them pass it on to the Americans, because it would save face, almost. You're kind of surrendering to the Russians instead of the Americans, this opponent that just, kicked your ass so badly. And, it would save face and honor and all that good stuff for the Japanese. But, like I said, the message didn't get passed on. So then, eventually, the Japanese capitulate and they send a surrender message to the Americans saying, hey, we surrender, but there's only one condition. We want to keep the emperor. You can't depose the emperor from us. We want to keep him. And the Americans rejected that surrender and then went on to bomb the Japanese, and then accepted the same surrender ultimatum that, we surrender, except we just want to keep the emperor. Also, higher-ups who worked on the bomb and actually were authorities in deciding to drop this weapon, such as Eisenhower, Einstein, MacArthur, all looked at this devastation and lamented what it did to the Japanese people, and lamented dropping the bomb. I think even Eisenhower flat out said that we didn't need to cause this torture onto the Japanese people, and if the people who dropped the bomb looked back and say, we didn't need to drop the bomb, I think that means, at least to get Japan to surrender, we didn't need to drop the bomb. But like I said, I do think it was necessary to drop the nuclear bomb at the end of World War II, and I'll tell you why. Because we needed that lesson. We needed the lesson that came with dropping the nuclear bomb. We needed to really test it, and we were going to test it at some point down the line in a combat situation against cities. And we needed to learn that lesson, that how devastating this weapon really is, how it can completely obliterate everything. So let's take an alternate sort of stance on history here, and let's say that everything is the same. Everything in history is the same, except the Americans accepted that first surrender ultimatum and let the Japanese surrender, but they still have the nuclear bombs, and they're still, they tested them in on Bikini Atoll and stuff, but they hadn't really, tested them in cities. So they have these bombs they're not fully aware of, and they don't really know what it does. And then, in I believe it was 1948 or 1947, the Russians get their own nuclear bomb, and then, things continue on their merry way until the Korean War. And in the Korean War, both sides have these bombs, and they don't really know what they're going to do. And the Korean War happens, and then both sides decide this is the perfect combat situation to test these bombs. And now there's more bombs, more countries have bombs, they start dropping them left, right, and center, because they don't really know what these bombs can do. They don't really know the devastation that they can cause. Let's just say things would have been a lot worse. So my point is basically that we were going to drop the bomb anyway. And it could have been a lot worse than what happened at the end of World War II. And we needed to drop the bomb just so we knew what exactly it can do. And I lament, and it's a terrible tragedy that the Japanese had to be at the end of this weapon, and they had to be the ones who really experienced the after effects and aftermath of that bomb. I mean, I have great respect for the Japanese culture, the Japanese people. I mean, I've been to Japan. I speak Japanese myself. I have nothing but respect for those people. But we needed to have that lesson. We needed to know what we can do, just so we knew we could never use this weapon ever again. And I also want to, praise the government of the time, the Allied government of the time, that they didn't use the weapon again, because they didn't know it, but they were writing the precedent for nuclear weapons. They were writing the precedent how these weapons were going to be used when other people had them, and if they had just, started dropping them willy-nilly, then once Russia gets the bomb, they say, hey, the Americans can start dropping it willy-nilly. We can start dropping it willy-nilly, and it's chaos. It's world's over. But because they didn't use it in other combat situations, then other countries wouldn't use them in other combat situations, and thus, the precedent for nuclear weapons was formed. And I wish that the American government today has as much prudence and as much wisdom to know that they're in a similar situation, except they're writing the precedent on how to use drone attacks and drone strikes. But that's a different conversation entirely. So I think I've just about wrapped up everything I wanted to say here. I got a little bit of time, but I don't think there's anything more I can iterate than what I've already said. Like I said, I do think it was necessary to drop the bomb, just so we knew what it could do, just so we had that lesson, and just so we knew that we could never, use this weapon ever again. And like I said, we were going to test the bomb at some point, and it could have been a lot worse than what happened to Japanese. And at some point in history, the bomb would have been tested, and it could have been any nation that was at the butt end of that testing, and it could have been so much worse. So there you go. If you got a different opinion, love to hear from you guys. Put it in the comment field. But for now, this is going to be Joseph, Research Runner of Stalin, signing off, and I'll see you guys later.